Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome in as we move things around, intern Joe.
Moving, always moving, Mike.
Well, let's see if this sounds better. Get this microphone fixed.
There it is.
There we go. That's better. Did a little spring cleaning the other day. The issue is when you do spring cleaning, you got to make sure everything's plugged in.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome in, everybody, to GC Live Talking Tuesday nights. He's intern Joe back from the Masters.
Yeah.
Real Masters at the Inn, intern Joe. I want to know what that experience was like for you being able to work it again. And of course, I'm like you, but we have an exciting show tonight because this week, of course, is the week of the spring game. Now, look, I'll get into my thoughts, my overall thoughts about spring games, but I think the bottom line is this. Anytime we have an opportunity to talk about some football, we're able to see some of these younger players out there, in particular the freshmen that have arrived early on campus, who we've heard nothing but good things. Shane Beamer talked about that as well today. You have to get excited about this week. Again, it's not Saturday in the fall in South Carolina. I get that. But at the same time, too, we're talking some football. We're talking about being able to see what this team has been able to accomplish through 14 practices at that point heading into Saturday.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, for the guys that have, aren't necessarily going to see the field this upcoming season, kind of the guys that are still developing, you talked about those true freshmen, those incoming freshmen. This week is huge. It's their chance to really, show what they can do in front of this fan base and give this fan base, some sense of security on why they were recruited here and why, they were offered and stuff like that. Also just a chance to play in front of the fans of Willie B for the first time. And, today at Beamer's Pressure, I'm sure we'll get into that, break down that a little bit more, but Beamer was very, very, very complimentary about his new class of incoming freshmen. He said, that he took a look at all of them out there, and it looked like, he said these were the words that he used, was that, he said that I didn't see a guy out there that we can say that we missed on. And I think that's the highest praise you can get from your head coach for your first spring ball as a true freshman. So I'm excited to see those true freshmen out there and a lot of the new faces. I think that's what the spring game is all about. Obviously, we know the superstars. We know the guys that are going to dominate. And, I mean, those guys will be fun to watch, track through summer ball and whatnot leading up into the spring. And it'll also be good to see them again, see who's put on some weight, who's made some changes in the weight room. But I'm most looking forward to the new guys, the new faces, seeing what they can do because, they might be playing in some spots where there might be a lot of depth and we might not be able to see them as much in the fall. So that's my take on the spring game, Mike. I'm excited, man. Football, finally.
Well, let's begin there. Let's start there about what we're looking forward to the most. And, if you're watching the program, feel free to use the comment button, whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or wherever on social media. We would love to be able to hear from you guys on this Tuesday night. And yes, USC baseball is in action. We'll have updates for you guys throughout the night, as we always do. But again, as I've said many times before, like going to the movie theaters, like going to the grocery store, there's not just one option. If you want to be able to have a different flavor that evening, right? Go to a different movie, get a different soda pop at the grocery store. That's what you have here with GC Live Talking Tuesday nights as we talk football all year round. And again, with the spring football game being this week, we have an opportunity to start seeing what the 2023 team will look like, what this offense will look like with new offensive coordinator Dal Loggins. I don't think it's one of those things where you go into Saturday and you have a clipboard or, you're watching some of the clips at home and you're like, all right, man, this is exactly what the offense is going to look like. No, but it's going to give you a taste. It's going to give you a sample. It's going to give you just enough where it's going to whet your palate, where over the next couple months, leading into SEC media days, leading into that first practice of fall camp, you're going to be thinking, man, we saw this in the spring game. We saw Spencer Rattler do this, or we saw one of these younger players do that. And it's going to make you want to see what can this offense be? How good can this offense be? What's this offensive line going to look like? And I think, intern Joe, for me, the obvious thing that we want to see this weekend is an idea of this offense, right? Again, I'm not going to hold my breath and say, all right, this is what we're going to see on Saturday. Expect this in the fall. But tempo, comfortability from Rattler, right out there, those are little things that I'm looking forward to on Saturday. To carry on Joyner, right? I mean, we can go down a list here. To carry on Joyner, what does he look like at running back? Right? Montario Hardesty just last week, he praised him about the way that he's able to not only make cuts in the backfield as a guy that's making a transition as a quarterback / wide receiver and becoming a running back now, but he also praised him for the way that he's able to block because he's on the punt block team. The punt team, excuse me, the way he blocks. Yeah. So again, these are the little things that I'm looking forward to. We can dig in deeper into some of these things, but is there anything else that I'm missing, Intern Joe?
I mean, not necessarily. I was going to kind of piggyback off of you and talk about the offense and get this thing rolling. But to start things off, I mean, I think we've got a good setup. It's going to be a fun Tuesday. Happy to be back in the saddle as always. But yeah, man, I'm ready to roll. But you mentioned it. You brought it up with Spencer. Something I'm really looking forward to seeing is the offense. You know, it's our first look at Dowell's offense. And I know it's going to be relatively similar to what they've been running, you know, in previous years. But I also think that, you know, it is a new offensive coordinator, so we're going to see a different way of doing things. And Beamer alluded to it a little bit in his presser today that, you know, he's not a dummy. He knows that, you know, teams are going to be watching their spring game. And he knows that, you know, they can't throw the entire playbook out there. But, you know, in the limited options that we will see in this offense, I think we still will get a first look at what Dowell Loggins' offense looks like. And I think, you know, running it, something for me, my piece on this is like, I think watching the backups run through it is just as interesting as the first team, because you see how well the install has gone and you see, you know, what the backups are absorbing and that kind of thing. It's not just about the first team offense as it is. You know, when it comes down to summer practice and things like that. So I'm really excited to see Dowell's offense. Obviously, it's against, you know, his own team. And so we're not really going to get a true, you know, measuring stick on whether or not, you know, he is a good offensive coordinator. We know how good of a recruiter he is. We know, you know, how good of a coach he is. Now it's just about to see how good of a play caller he is. And, you know, the spring game it'll be interesting to see just kind of what system they're going to be running. And I mean, obviously, like I said, we know a little bit of what it's going to look like, but how they're going to, you know, run through it, like the schematics of it all and the fluidity of it all is what I'm trying to get at. So I'm pumped to see the first look at Dowell's offense and how everyone kind of adapts and fits in it. It's going to be really interesting to me.
One thing in particular to keep an eye on, we mentioned the running back situation, Joyner, Mario Anderson. How does that play out? Juju McDowell, of course, we understand that going into spring camp, he's the only guy that came back that had consistently played the running back position the previous year, right? Joyner was lined up in the backfield a little bit, but you know what I mean. He wasn't a running back. He was back there a couple times as a running back, but he wasn't a running back. And then, of course, Anderson transferring in from Division II Newberry College, about 45 minutes away from Columbia. Mario is an interesting player to me. Mario is a guy that with his size, and I've equated him to Kevin Harris. I think he's about an inch shorter, maybe 10 pounds lighter than what Kevin was. But the build, the style, might be a little bit faster than Kevin. But when I think of Mario, that's what I've took away so far. What does he look like out there on the field? And granted, okay, whether you have 15, 20, 30,000, whatever the case may be in terms of the attendance, yeah, it's not going to replicate what it's going to be like on Saturdays in the fall. We understand that. But playing under the lights, there's something special about that. There's something to be said about that. And for certain players out there, and you look at this a lot with younger players, right? You think about the Pup Howards of the world. You think about some of these younger players, even a Stone Blanton who was here last year, but now his role has increased, especially through camp, because we don't know what's going to happen with Mo Kaba when he comes back. These younger players are going to have an opportunity to prove themselves, no question about it, but how do they respond when the spotlight is truly on them? And I remember asking Beamer this a year ago. I said, how much stock do you actually put into a spring game? Because I've been around coaches, whether it be coaches that I played for, whether it's coaches I've covered, whether it's coaches I've got to meet along my journey as both a player and as a reporter. And some coaches, they put zero stock into spring games, zero stock, because what they see you do in those 14 practices leading up to that spring game, that's how they evaluate you more than anything. Beamer, the way he answered that question a year ago when I asked him, he said, yeah, we put a lot of stock into those 14 practices leading up to that spring game. Because what you do on Saturday, right, you can go out there, you can ball out, you have 2 picks, whatever, right? 2 touchdowns, whatever the case may be. But if you played like crap those other 14 practices, if you weren't consistent leading up to that, how can you trust them come week 1, come week 2 of the season? So as he mentioned, it's a combination of the two. But more than anything, if you're a younger player, if you're a player that hasn't had as many reps out there in a game, they put more stock into it because they want to see how you respond when the pressure's on you. You can't replicate that. Again, whether it's 15, 20, 30,000 plus, whatever the case may be, it won't be the true representation of what you'll see in the fall, Williams-Brice. But at the same time, too, it's much different than going out there, having a scrimmage, and practically, and I say practically because there's some parents out there, there's some people that will be invited to watch the scrimmage, but practically in front of no crowd. That's different. How do those younger players respond? How does Pup Howard look based on everything we've heard so far this spring? Desmond Umeozulu at edge. Some of these younger players, how do they look when the spotlight is on them? That's the biggest thing. And that's how I would say Beamer and this coaching staff is evaluating this game in comparison to how some other coaches view a spring game.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, it's really interesting to see how coaches do that, how they do evaluate spring games. Because I mean, like I said, I mean, as a lot of you know, I grew up in South Bend, and in South Bend, it was a little different. People did it a little differently in South Bend than they did it here. But I think a common theme with the SEC is that they do look at the spring game to see if some guy stands out. And I liked Beamer's response today. Which was basically if somebody, stands out and does something crazy, that they're definitely going to give him a second look. And it definitely helps their case going into the summer. And I mean, personally, if I were to, be a head coach of an SEC football team, that's the way I would do it. I wouldn't, have the spring game not mean anything. If that's the case, it doesn't, help, your fan base, your program, anything like that. It's kind of just pomp and circumstance. But I think, here the kind of underlying energy that lies within this game is that, it is an opportunity for guys to really put on, to really give themselves a shot going into summer ball, to give themselves a second look, second chance in spots where they might have been overlooked. And so I think it's a great opportunity for some guys that are possibly lower in the depth chart, or just trying to make a name for themselves heading into the summer. And a great opportunity, as we talked about, these true freshmen really gives them a chance to put their name out there and also, show their game in front of these fans for the first time. I think it's an awesome opportunity because, the fans that follow recruiting are really, really anxious to see them. And everyone that I've talked to on Twitter, they're really, really excited for the spring game. And I mean, growing up in South Bend, it was just kind of, it's a blue gold game. It is what it is. But everyone I talk to in the SEC, it's a spring game. It's the opportunity.
Well, it's your first look. It's your first look at some of these guys. And again, what you see on Saturday, this happens every year. And Big Red, I want to get to your question in a second because I think it's a fair one. And I asked Beamer actually this last week, and we'll get into it a little bit more in a minute. But these spring games, there's going to be a player or two. It happens every year, where there's going to be a player or two that just plays absolutely out of their mind. Absolutely out of their mind. And because this is such a football craved area, we're going to talk about that craze all summer long. And we're going to say, wow, it could have been, Rashad Amos last year. It could have been a couple of years ago, even Jay Urich, the performance he had at wide receiver. There's going to be players that go out there and they perform so well that people are going to say, man, could he be that next guy to do this or that? Jason Brown 2 years ago with how he looked at quarterback. Now, what I would say, though, to all of that, that's not to say if a player goes out there and has a great performance, it means nothing. Okay? Let me make that clear. I don't want to seem like I'm going to be, because it's going to come across like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. That's not to say it doesn't mean anything. However, we also have to keep in mind a couple things. One, it's not always ones versus ones. You're going to have guys that are on 3, sometimes even 4th team, offense, defense, going up against each other. So before we sit here and declare someone the next freaking Marcus Lattimore or the next friggin' Connor Shaw, slow down. Slow down. Before we see Desmond goes out there and he makes, slow down before we're crowning him the next Clowney. Okay? Because it's going to happen. Intern Joe, I'm telling you right now, it's going to happen. You watch. You watch come Monday. You watch the message boards on Gamecock Central come Sunday. When someone, I'm telling you, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, right? Lenore Sellers could go out there and throw an absolute beauty of a throw, which, by the way, all spring for both the players and the coaching staff, we've heard how strong of an arm he's had. And even going back to that first scrimmage a week plus ago, I was told that he looked really impressive with his precision and also his ability to move outside of the pocket with his feet, which, again, we've heard so much about dual threat quarterbacks. This kid can throw the football, right? I'm tired of people saying, oh, dual threat quarterback. All right, he can move, but he can also throw the ball. Because every quarterback outside of Rattler for that first scrimmage, I don't know what happened with that second one, outside of Rattler, everyone was live, which to me, that's the way it should be. But anyway, point being is this. We will have guys that have performances this Saturday that will make you say, wow. But slow the roll just a little bit. Slow the roll. Know who they're going up against, too. And again, that's not to say that you can't appreciate it. But that doesn't mean if, I'm making this up, Sellers throws 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns on the 4th team defense or whatever the case may be, because I don't know exactly what the pairings are going to be on Saturday. Let's slow back. Oh, man, that guy should start over Doty. Slow down, or be ahead of Doty, for the second quarterback. But we'll see that stuff. We'll see that. Big Red brings up a question, though, Intern Joe. And it's one that I'm not going to be surprised if we see on Saturday. And that question is, if the defense is great, does that mean the offense didn't do as well? Beamer today talked about this past weekend scrimmage, the second scrimmage. And essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, the defense outperformed the offense a good bit. At times, the offense showed flashes. But again, talking about good on good, ones versus ones, the offense was a little bit behind the defense. I asked Beamer this last week because I want to get a feel of where this team was. And I asked him, I said, Shane, typically at this time of the year, even going into fall camp when it's early, defenses tend to be ahead of the offense. That's not always the case, depending on what the team is, right? I mean, you go back to Southern Cal when they had Reggie Bush and Matt Liner, right? All those guys. I mean, there's certain offenses that are going to be ahead of your defense. No question about it. With this, though, this team, the defense is where it needs to be in terms of being ahead a little bit. That doesn't mean the offense is sucking right now. That doesn't mean the offense, oh my goodness, they're going back, they're digressing, because on Saturday, there could be periods of times, especially early on, where the offense isn't able to move the football. And before you reach for that panic button, all I would say is that's normal. That's normal, especially if you have a new offensive coordinator. So that's not to make excuses, but I mean, Intern Joe, let's call it for what it is. Offense goes out there, first 4 series, and they march right down the field, and they score. Is the offense incredible, or does that mean your defense sucks? You can't really have it both ways. It's one of those things that what you want to see in this game, you want to see your offense be able to convert on some big plays, right? If they're in a situation, 3rd down, and, they're behind the sticks a little bit, they're able to find ways to make plays happen. Defensively, you want to see good things. You want to see them make aggressive plays on defense. You want to see them try to force some fumbles. You want to see them try to jump some routes where it's a 50-50 ball and they're able to go up there and make a play. I mean, there's going to be things that we look at. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows all the way around because you're going up against yourself. So, again, there'll be some good things that the offense does on Saturday, but I'm not going to be shocked if the defense looks a little bit more ahead of the offense at this point of time.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, that's usually how it is, right? The defense does always look a little bit ahead because it is a little bit easier to look ahead on defense in the spring game, quite frankly, because the offense, and especially in the situation that the offense is in right now, right? Fresh offensive coordinator, a lot of new faces, fresh offensive line and whatnot. I think the defense is just going to look ahead, especially just because same coordinator, a lot of returning guys that have been in the system for a while, developing and whatnot. So, I mean, personally, if you're asking for my prediction, I think the defense will look ahead as they do always. And that's usually the story coming out of spring games is like, oh, the defense looked good. What's happening with the offense? But I mean, to Big Red's point, I think it's a little bit of both, right? I don't necessarily think that because you have to weigh all the factors, right? Like I kind of just laid out, fresh offensive coordinator, fresh offensive line, a lot of new faces on offense. And it is a little bit harder to get the offense clicking. And we saw that at the beginning of last season, even in season, what was going on with the offense. It took them a little bit to kind of get their feet on the ground and start running and working as a cohesive unit. So I think, it's a win for the offense if we do see some production and stuff, but the defense is going to look ahead. Baseline. That's how it's going to be. Now, if the offense all of a sudden comes out and dominates and, doesn't mean the defense looks bad. No, absolutely not. It means the offense had a great day and the defense just has to, take a look at the film and go from there. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything is, it's a dumpster fire.
And look, the secondary for South Carolina, we know it's thin right now. We know that there's some talented guys that are projected to start this year. But at the same time, too, and especially talking about the corners, that nickel spot as well, who's going to be that guy that you can consistently count on? We have an idea, right? We have an idea of who's going to start. Marcellus Dial has looked good. O'Donnell Fortune, you think, you're going back to the Gator Bowl and just the momentum he's been able to create and everything that we've heard from this coaching staff, including Torian Gray, of how he's been able to really parlay that into a solid winter workout, off season, into a solid start of spring practices. What does that look like on Saturday? Nick Eamon-Worry, DQ Smith, like we can go down the list. Like they have guys, but that's a position as well as edge where they are thin right now. And I've said it multiple times in this show, intern Joe. I don't care who the hell you have in your secondary. If you don't put pressure on the quarterback, it doesn't matter who you have in the backfield. You could have, you could have Stephon Gilmore. You could have J.C. Horn, DJ Swearinger, Captain Munderland. I mean, yeah, we could go down the list. It doesn't matter who you have back there if you can't put pressure on the quarterback. So that will be one of the tasks this weekend for this defensive line, as well as the interior of the D-line in stopping the run, which was an area that they struggled at last season. So those are something to keep an eye on. We're talking about this offense in particular this weekend. Now, going through this, Wayne brings it up, Dal Loggins called plays in the NFL for almost 15 years. Our offense will be good. I truly believe the offense will make progress this year. And I think you'll see it earlier in comparison to what we saw with Marcus Satterfield in not just year one, but year two. I do think there's going to be some growing pains early. Hopefully that's not the case to an extent where you're not able to move the football game one against North Carolina because, look, you're not playing, TikTok Tech. You're not playing the Eau Claire JV football team. I mean, you're playing a Power 5 football team, and not just a Power 5 team, but a team that is projected to finish pretty high in their conference. So I say that because there's going to be those growing pains, but how quickly can you get moving with that? And one guy that we've talked about, intern Joe, that I'm very excited to see, and I mentioned it last week that it looks like as of right now, he's more in line to play guard than center. At first, it seemed like Gargiulo was going to be the center. But based on how he's looked at guard, on top of the fact of how it's helped the guys around him on the offensive line, it looks like he's going to be guard, where he mainly plays. I think he'll play some guard. I think we'll see him play some center as well. When he is at guard, though, how does the offensive line look as a whole? Again, you can only take so much away from the fact that it's a spring game because these guys are going up against the same freaking guys in practice all spring. But interested to see how the offensive line looks and just giving not just Rattler, but whoever the hell's playing quarterback as they move around groups on Saturday, just give him time. Give that quarterback some time to make some plays.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is another thing that I'm really excited to see. See where they put Gargiulo, kind of just see where everyone is at. Because I think Mike, we've talked about it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks that the offensive line is one of those positions where you want to get a group together. You want to get them meshing and just settled and in stone as quickly as possible. So I think that's going to be the game plan for the Gamecocks coming up, and where Gargiulo will be. I'm really interested to see because again, you're right, Mike. He was the favorite to play center, but then now there are talks about him moving to guard and whatnot. So I'm really interested to see who shakes out where on the offensive line, and I think out of any of the positions, minus the superstars and whatnot, like obviously Spencer Rattler's going to be the starting quarterback. Like I don't think there's any secret about that. I think the offensive line is one of those positions where we're going to see about as close as, the starting lineup as we'll get. I mean, obviously it's still an open competition, but, in terms of open competitions, the offensive line is one to be looking forward to have the spring game, really mean something. So I'm interested to see, what ends up with Gargiulo, Sidney Fuger, just if Big Tree cracks into it, I think it's going to be Vershawn Lee. A lot of names in there that I'm forgetting for sure. But I'm really interested because there's a lot of capable guys that can step up, and a lot of names again like in the true freshman ranks that could crack into the starting lineup or at least the rotation for sure. So I'm really interested to see what happens with the O-line. And I think, the potential with this offensive line is the roof. I mean, the ceiling is the roof in terms of MJ, but I think especially with the promotion of Lonnie Teasley and Greg Adkins kind of moving to a little bit more behind the scenes role, it's the same thing really. Like, but I think it was a great move. And I think, those two, it's like yin and yang, man. I can't praise enough how well those two work together and how effective they are and recruiting and everything. Those guys are awesome. So I'm really excited to see what they can put together at the offensive line. And again, like I said, it's going to be the one position that if you're going to say this is going to be the one position that, you're watching guys compete for a starting job in, and you might see these guys that go out in the first group at the spring game, you're going to see, besides the starters and the Spencer Rattlers of the world. I think the offensive line is one of them. And another thing too, Mike, talking about the defense a little bit and the defensive backs, you have to, factor in that a lot of guys are banged up. Beamer mentioned it today that, it's kind of hard to factor in a roster, to make a roster when you have so many guys banged up. And that's something else I'm really interested to see is how, the roster shakes up, who's, out. I believe they'll release that coming up soon. They've talked about it.
Well, they'll be cautious. They're
Exactly. They're not going to push anybody.
That's as expected, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you think there's some guys that we already know, like Terrell Dawkins or, Jordan Strawn. I mentioned Mo Kaba earlier. You're going to be smart with these guys. And while you're going to be smart with these players, it's going to open up opportunities for a lot of these younger guys. We mentioned Stone Blanton in the situation that he's been presented this spring working with the ones. We mentioned Desmond Umeozulu and some of the other guys that are getting work at edge and the opportunity that it's presented them. So I say that because I think it goes well into this next question from Todd. Is the 4-2-5 defense hurting the run defense? I don't think it is. And here's why. You look at what South Carolina has done as a whole on defense in the first 2 years since Clayton White has arrived. All USC has done is they've led the conference in takeaways. back-to-back years. So I bring that up because defensively, they've made the adjustments to what you need to do in order to be successful, which is you have to be able to stop the pass. Now, have they done it? Have they done it to a point where it's like, oh, everything's well? No, because there were some issues last year, okay, in comparison to where they were in year one when White arrived here with Gray. But the improvement in comparison to where it was before Beamer arrived, so like that 2021 season, right? I mean, one thing that it's in my mind is that Ole Miss game. That Ole Miss game, which was one of the, I think it may have been the final game of the Will Muschamp era. It was at Ole Miss in Oxford. And it didn't matter what South Carolina did offensively. They were going up and down on the Rebels. They were scoring at will. But defensively, they couldn't they couldn't stop a cold. So what are you going to do to improve that this season? To stop the run, you just need to be able to, number one, stay healthy. I mean, really, you look at the injuries they've had up front, whether it be edge, whether it be outside linebacker, whether it be, on the interior with a guy even like Boogie Huntley. You need to be able to stay healthy. That's been an issue that they had last season. They need to be able to find a way to get over that hurdle. There's no magic formula. You're not going to go, it's not Tuck Everlasting. You're not going to drink out of this friggin' fountain and you're just going to be automatically healthy all season. It doesn't work that way. But outside of the things that you can't control, which of course, injuries you can't, just happen, you need to just do your 111. You need to be able to make plays up front. If they're putting you in a situation where, as we've joked around before, as an old college teammate who played edge once said, I feel like a freaking traffic cone out here because I'm just taking on double teams left and right. If that's what your responsibility is up front, then your responsibility is to take on two guys. You're not going to be that guy that racks up the statistics. Do your freaking job. And when I think back to 2 years ago, and again, it's not to say it was perfect by any means, but there were times where JJ Anambare, he was kind of presented that traffic cone responsibility. And at times he tried to do a little bit too much, I felt like. But when he did what he was supposed to do, it freed up other guys. That's why you had the type of season you had with Jabari Ellis that season. That's why you had opportunities with Aaron Sterling to make some plays. So I bring that up because, again, in order to help the run defense this year, 4-2-5, it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to continue to grow even more just because this is where the game is. This is where the game is. It's a passing league now. The SEC is a passing conference. This isn't the 80s. This isn't the 90s. This isn't even in the friggin' early 2000s. There'll be outliers, as we've always mentioned on this program. Just like anything in life, there will be outliers. There will be teams that you'll have a running back that comes along and you will continue to give him the ball 20 plus, 25 plus times a game. But the majority of the teams, not just in the SEC, but throughout college football, are going to be pass happy, or they're going to lean more passing than they are going to run. And because of that, you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to find players that can play that nickel spot, opposed to having an extra linebacker out there to stop the run and playing a 4-3 defense, opposed to having a 5-2 defense. I bring these things up because, again, I don't think it's the 4-2-5 defense that is what's causing South Carolina to struggle with the run defense. I think it's a combination of, number one, injuries, but that aside, because every other team in the country goes through injuries to an extent. Maybe USC dealt with it a little bit more last year up front in the box. But you need to be able to just do your assignment. Don't friggin' force things where you want to be the guy that picks up 6, 7, 8 tackles. No, sometimes you're going to have to be the traffic cone. You're going to have to take on that, the double team. Or even if you're just getting blocked man up, you're going to have to take on that blocker because it can free someone up. It might not free someone up on the line. It could free up that second level intern, Joe. It could be a Pup Howard. It could be a Stone Blanton. Just do your freaking job. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, and to simplify all of that, I'm gonna bring it real simple. all defenses are designed to stop the run and to piggyback off of you. If you do your job, you will stop the run eventually. I mean, it's pretty simple. And obviously, I think that's kind of where Jordan Birch got tied up a little bit, is where, he wasn't necessarily doing his job. And now, granted, I'm not saying Jordan Birch was a bad player by any means. Jordan Birch was a phenomenal player, but sometimes he would get caught up, trying to do too much, maybe sometimes. And that's why we would see less production out of him, is because, he was in the wrong spot at the wrong time. But, maybe I'm whiffing on that take a little bit too, but it's just the Clayton White's defense has stopped the run before. It's designed to stop the run. You can't have a defense that's not designed to stop the run in the SEC, or else you'll get beat by 50 every game, because every team has a quality running back that will run all over you if you let them. So plain and simple, I mean, if you do exactly what Mike was just saying, if you do your job, everything should come to fruition. It just takes process. And
I truly believe that was the issue. I truly believe that was the issue, because again, when they were healthy, and I understand they went through injuries, and I really don't want to blame everything on injuries. I really don't want to be that person. I know there's a lot of people that will talk about injuries. I mean, we do this for every sport, right? Men's basketball, they dealt with it. Baseball, they've dealt with it. At some point, you can't put everything on injuries. They just happen. Every team goes through injuries to some extent. So I bring it up, Intern Joe, because again, and I see this from Aaron, I have to try to figure out stopping the run. I understand it looked foolish last year at times. I totally understand that. But at the same time, too, and I'm not saying the pass defense is perfect by any means. Obviously, it's a new year, new secondary with the corners in terms of who's going to be starting game in and game out. But you have to be able to put pressure up front. And when you put pressure up front, that will also help with the run defense. It all goes hand in hand together. 3-3-5. Look, you can change things up. I'm sure we'll see them mix things up defensively. But the core of this defense, your base defense, is going to be a 4-2-5. That's the style of play that Clayton White has brought to USC. And I think overall, again, that's not to say it's been perfect, but you got to go back to 2 years ago, Intern Joe. Look where this team is now, right? From a defensive standpoint compared to where they were 2 years ago. They have made progress. Is it perfect? No. But they've led the SEC in takeaways the last 2 years. They're doing good things defensively. Now it's about being able to put it all together. And if they can stop the run, which I feel like they've done a good job with recruiting. I mean, that's something else with it. They've done a good job with recruiting. These younger players who Beamer, and I think you brought it up right off the top of the show, Beamer has mentioned there's not, and I'm paraphrasing, there's not one player out there that's a freshman that they've said, man, he doesn't belong out here with us. Again, paraphrasing. Think of a guy like Desmond Umeozulu. I mean, I keep going back to that name because this is what they've done from a recruiting standpoint, where they hope they can be able to make improvements up front. And again, if they can stop the run and they feel comfortable with the pass rushing, with some of these guys who should be natural pass rushers, right? Donovan Westmoreland moved him up from outside linebacker. Now he's at edge. These guys know how to rush. If they can find ways to stop the run in this defense, look out. Look out. You're going to see more turnovers. You're going to see more takeaways. Because what's going to happen is it's going to make things a hell of a lot easier. You put your hand on the dirt, and you know it's going to be a pass every time. Teams aren't going to want to run on you. That's what the goal is, Intern Joe, this spring. That's what the goal is.
Absolutely. And again, you want to get nasty. You want the guys that are going to be your role players that are going to fill in, like the O'Donnell Fortunes that kind of came in Vanderbilt. And then you also saw, I'm forgetting a bunch of names here because, again, it was a long week, and we'll get into that after the ads, but whatnot. But this game is to show, these role players that are going to come in and filter in for the guys that, are going to win the starting jobs and stuff. It's their chance to show, their nastiness in game and, just show in front of the crowd and show that, in a game atmosphere. Because it does. Mike, it does get repetitive in practice. You feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And so it does feel a little repetitive when you're working in practice, but then when you get that change of scenery and stuff, it gets guys up. especially the spring game. You've been going against the same guys for a while, and granted, you are going to be going against, same colors again, but it's different atmosphere. You're playing in Williams-Brice. You have people watching. You have recruits watching. And that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And again, you talked about the guys that you need to see the nasty from. And I think there's plenty of those guys out there right now going into summer ball that if they can show it now, they certainly are going to compete for one of those role player spots. And if not a starting job, it's going to be really, really, really fun to see, at least for me. I don't know about everybody else, but just to watch some of those guys get nasty, kind of get nitty gritty there on the defensive line and defensively, just to see who brings it. And obviously I know, there might be, I don't know if Spencer's going to be full contact. I would assume he will. And either way, there will be a quarterback that is full go. And there will be, running backs and wide receivers that are full go. So you will have your chance to kind of show that nasty and show, be a football player. That's what it's all about, Mike, especially, now is because, in spring practice, sometimes it gets a little light. You're up there with shells on, helmets and shoulder pads, and you don't really get to show that nasty as much. So now's your chance. Now is your chance to go be a football player. And so I think it's a great opportunity for guys to really, especially on defense, to really show, that nasty, that dog that they have in them, if you will.
We'll hit on some of the questions too. Want to get into one of these things that Aaron brought up. But before that, intern Joe, let's get to our weekly ad reads. And as always, as you pull those up, intern Joe,
Gotcha.
You surprise me. Whatever one you want to go with first this week.
Sounds good. How about our guy Clint Hammond, Mike?
Oh, Clint Hammond, best in the business. I mean, he's helped out so many Gamecocks throughout the Midlands and beyond over at the Mortgage Network. Give him a call at 803-576-4450. He'll make that process of being able to buy a home and interest rates and all that fun stuff that, well, when you're buying a home, it can become difficult. He'll help you out just like he did with our very own Wes Mitchell, as well as former Gamecock captain and quarterback Perry Orth. And today's show is also brought to you by our good friends over at Liberty Tax.
Yeah, Mike, Liberty Tax is our good friend, also a co-sponsor of this program. Tax anxiety is that uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time, Mike. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals in your neighborhood, open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents, and when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. You can find their number on our graphic right now. That number is 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576. As it is tax time. It's April, Mike. It's the best time of the year, if you will.
Got one more week to go.
We all love taxes.
And I'm actually, shout out to Larry over at Liberty Tax. They're actually helping me out through with my taxes, and I'm using them. So shout out to Larry and the great team over at Liberty Tax. I want to bring this up by Aaron real quickly. Aaron mentions, you can't have a freshman safety as your leading tackler. I'll say this. You still have the majority of your leading tacklers in the country, and you can go back and look this up. I can't remember. I'm assuming I think the first 10, 15 are all linebackers, but you'll see a safety or two in there. It's not as uncommon to see a safety or two in there, depending on the style of defense that you play. And what I mean by that is sometimes you will see safeties in the box. You'll see safeties in the box. Again, the majority of the time, you will have, and this is even for your good defenses, but sometimes you will see safeties drop into the box and they're asked to be a run stopper. You see it in the pros as well. I saw it with Duggar with the Patriots, having covered the Patriots this past fall as well as the Gamecocks. Duggar was a guy that was brought down into the box a good bit because of his tackling. We saw this with Jalen Foster 2 years ago. So I bring that up because while I do agree with you that you don't want to have a safety or a secondary guy leading your team in tackles, Just like if your corner is high in tackles. I get that. But at the same time, too, it's not as it seems if it was, say, 10 years ago. So it's one of those things that I wouldn't lose too much sleep about, but certainly some of those numbers can go down in a good way. And what I mean by that is if you're able to make sure that he's not getting to that second level. If you're doing your job up front, and again, sometimes it is being the spill guy. It is being the guy, as we've mentioned before, being the traffic cone, taking on the block so that your teammate can make the tackle. But sometimes that happens. Again, and I don't want to get too crazy with X's and O's here, but if you have a safety down the box, Nick Eamon-Worry's down the box here, and they're going off tackle, and your edge is there to be able to set the edge, and he's spilling it to the outside. He's doing his responsibility. His responsibility is to take on the block, and that frees up your +1, as we would call it, on defense. And the +1 in this case, and I'm not going to, again, I don't know the exact matchups and what's going on and, what the offense is doing, but I'm just trying to explain in simple terms here. That +1 could be that safety that's down in the box. So, again, that's why sometimes you see those statistics a little bit different. It goes into what Big Red's talking about. Are the hybrid players the way of the future? Is it being good at one thing to perfection still a thing? I think it can't hurt, not just from a college standpoint, but from a professional standpoint as well. That if you can do a little of something across the board, it helps you with your versatility of being able to get onto the field. Certainly if you're a quarterback, right? And you could throw the football, 60 plus yards. And it's not even about reading. It's not even about just throwing, but it's reading the defense. And you're able to protect the football. Yeah, of course, that's tremendous if you can be one of the best at your positions. But again, if you're not a quarterback and you're trying to play at the next level, if you can do a little bit of something, look at a guy like Nate Atkins, right? Yeah. Nate Atkins could do a little bit of everything. He could catch, he can block, he can play some special teams, he can tackle. So, again, and I keep using this name, I promise I'll finally get away from it at some point. But Carlins Patel.
There it is.
Again, but it's the God's honest truth. If you're able, and look at what Cam Smith's another person to use as an example. His draft stock has gone up because he's able to not just play corner, but he's able to play nickel as well. And when you look at what South Carolina is doing this year at that nickel spot, at some point, they might feel more comfortable putting someone else at that nickel spot. Look, Spalding started a lot of games at nickel 2 years ago. And then Patel came in, I think it was the last 6-7 games he started at nickel. I bring that up because, like we saw with Cam Smith last year, South Carolina changed things up a little bit week to week because of matchups at that position. Torian Gray's mentioned it before. Based on who they're going up against that week, right? There could be a situation. We look at Georgia with their freakish tight end, and then you go up against a different team. They might not have a tight end that can do the things that he can do.
No.
So I bring that up because depending on the matchup, South Carolina might get creative with that nickelback position, that nickel spot. I want to keep moving along, though, intern Joe. I know we have some questions that are starred here.
Absolutely. I got a couple of them starred if you want me to pull them up.
We'll get to the Aaron's Augusta one in a second.
Yeah.
I don't think we need necessarily wide back like it's, the Green Bay Packers in the 60s.
I had the only reason I started that one is because I have one idea in mind, and that would.
All right, pull it up. Pull it back up. I unstarred it.
All right, I gotta find it. But so the wide back, if you will, are just like, I'm assuming Wayne just means like overall like versatile offensive weapon.
Well, we cut you off real quick. Last year we heard Satterfield use the term wide back. So yes. Maybe that Wayne, I'm thinking I'm going back in the friggin' 60s with Vince Lombardi when I'm hearing wide back. But yes, Satterfield last year talked about wide back with goodness. Blank in here because he just left. This is what happens as soon as a player leaves. Tight end, Jaheim Bell.
Yeah.
That's what he called him. He called him a wide back.
Well, yeah. And so like that's the way I'm processing is like overall offensive weapon, wide receiver / running back. And Mike, I mean, Mike, I mean, for me, it's one clear and obvious answer. For me, it's Nick Harbor. I mean, I think that you'll see a lot of that guy. And I think, he's going to be such a versatile, weapon in this offense. Wide back, wide receiver, tight end, running back, wherever you want to use this kid, he's going to be electric. And next year, especially, I think next year he'll have his feet under him. He'll have his freshman season done. I like that question, Wayne, because for me, it's a pretty clear and obvious answer. I think it's Nick Harbor without any doubt. And that's knocking on wood, barring anything goes wrong this year. And we see him stick with the Gamecocks, which I would assume he would. But just the way Dowell talks about using him in this offense and the way everyone else talks about him, I would assume Nick Harbor would be that one guy that you'll see doing just about everything for this offense.
Well, there could be two other guys too. There could be
Who
two
else do you
other
have
guys.
in mind? I'm intrigued.
Well, I think one player I think a lot of people could look at and be like, all right, I can see that. It's an obvious one, which would be to carry on Joyner.
Yeah.
Right? Joyner, you can kind of plug him on, you can kind of plug him wherever, right? Now, another one that I would say, and it might be a sleeper one, but then when you hear the name and you start thinking, you're like, all right, I could see that. Juju McDowell.
Yeah.
I feel like with what Juju brings to the table,
100%.
Getting him the ball in space is huge. Now, as I've said many times before, Juju's not the guy that you're going to give the ball 25 times between the tackles. It's just not going to happen. His body's not built that way.
Nope.
However, he's shifty enough where if he is running between the tackles and he breaks it, I mean, the shortest point from point A to point B is a straight line. So, of course, if you give him the ball and he's able to go up the middle and make a couple guys miss, we understand that. Getting him the ball in the flats, whether it be a swing pass, whether it be a screen, whether it just be just a quick out, getting him the football on the outside, screen pass, whatever the case may be, he's talented enough to make guys miss. So, again, a lot of it's going to have to do with what South Carolina is able to do from a blocking standpoint. I think the timing with Rattler with his offensive line, even though, as we've mentioned before, you lost 60% of your starting snaps from a year ago. Yes, you do have some guys that started last year in games on the offensive line. As a unit, it's going to look totally different. However, Rattler understands that it's not Oklahoma. And I'm not saying Oklahoma had the greatest offensive line in the freaking world. The point being is going from that to South Carolina, where it was a struggle. And it wasn't just a struggle because I know some people just want to blame it all on the offensive line. The blocking style, the zone blocking, which for 2 years USC struggled with for the majority of the time, it was an issue for the Gamecocks. I don't know this for certain, but I would expect to see some man blocking this weekend. And when you do man blocking, it helps out. Makes things a hell of a lot easier for these guys. So I say that because if they're able to take care of that, then you're able to really get creative in the backfield. You're really able to have some fun. Because when you don't, you have to get creative for all the wrong reasons. And what I mean by that, Intern Joe, is how many times last year, and I know it gave so many people headaches, how many times did we see South Carolina on, it's 2nd and long or 3rd and 11 or 12 because you weren't able to get any push in the first 2 plays, and what happens? It's 3rd and 12, 3rd and 14. And what's USC doing? They're throwing a screen. And the reason they had to do that is because they weren't getting any protection. They weren't confident enough in their protection up front. And in order for them to put themselves in what they felt like was the best situation to succeed, to pick up that first down on 3rd and 14.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw with the Patriots last year. I mean, I felt like for the majority, for the first half of the season, watching both USC and covering both teams, it was just screen left, screen right. Maybe you get crazy and throw a middle screen in there. But that was the difference, or I feel like will be the difference this year. You get that push up front, you can get creative with using those guys instead of it just being, all right, screen left, screen right, because we don't have a choice. We need to be able to get the ball out and find ways to move the football.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to wrap that question. But I did want to bring up Aaron's point. I like the Vicari Swain take. That's a good point. And I think they will use him a little bit more on defense. But that kid's an athlete. I just had to bring that one up. But I guess moving right along.
Can we throw another player out there, intern Joe, real quickly? Because I thought Wes brought up a good point. Speaking about a defense, Jalen Kilgore.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on him.
Oh, yeah. That kid's a dog.
Kilgore is a guy that's capable about playing on both offense and defense. He's playing defense right now, and he should have an opportunity to get a lot of snaps because of what they're doing right now in the secondary. So I wanted to throw that name out there because we haven't mentioned it yet, but he's another one of those young guns to keep an eye on Saturday.
Yeah, Kilgore's a dog. I'm also excited to see him. Just another kid that's freakishly athletic. Mike, stop me if you've heard this before, but the staff loves to recruit guys that just have all of that potential athletically and more. And I'm here for it. We talked about the versatility guys, like guys that, Big Red's comment about, multi-dimensional players. I think that's the hybrid, right? Big Red, I think it's, when you get guys that are just absolute freak athletes, they might be specialized in one thing that they can do, but when they're a freak athlete, I think it translates a little bit more back towards, or it lends them to being a multi-tool player. And again, like this kid, for example, I don't know, I can't really think of anybody off the top of my head that fits this criteria, but I'm sure there are people out there, but I apologize. I'm tired from the Masters, but anyways, so like if there's a kid that's freakishly athletic but super talented in one area, he's gonna look like a faceted player, and I think that's kind of the future of these hybrid players. And you brought up Nate Adkins. I thought Takarion Joyner was another one. Freak athlete, can do it all. So yeah, I think that's kind of the future, and Kilgore is one of them. But speaking of Big Red, another hypothetical question. Coach talked about playing other teams before game one in the future. Could that happen, or is that more of an NCAA rule that would need to change? I would love to see it. I think that's awesome. I think that's kind of what needs to happen. Do I think it will? I think it's going to be a long time before that does happen. Obviously the NFL does it. Mike, you covered the NFL, and we've seen the benefits there. But I think it would be something that would definitely benefit the game. But do I see it happening anytime in the next 10 years? No.
You say you don't see it happening anytime soon. I say that I expect it to happen sooner rather than later. And the reason being is this. I think we've heard more and more coaches speak out about it. I know Boomer mentioned that he's been on this train for the last 15 plus years. I think the way things are going right now in college sports, I think the way when you talk about money with NIL, things are changing.
Yes.
And they're not just changing, they're changing rapidly. These are things that you go back the last, 5, 10, 15 years, and you would say, I can't see that happening, right? I can't see this happening. And there's certain things. It's not apples to apples when we talk about playing a different team, scrimmaging a different team in the spring, opposed to NIL, opposed to the transfer portal opening up. There's certain things that you can't just compare the two. They won't measure up to be the same. But I say this because I feel like we are closer to it happening. Now, the challenging part is this. Logistically, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
There have to be an agreement between these schools to be able to make this happen. So let's use, 2 schools, for example, in state. Let's say South Carolina State and USC, for example, right? Let's say they wanted to do this. In my mind, you're not going to see like a South Carolina and Clemson face off. It's just not going to happen in the spring. I can't see that happening. And quite frankly, it makes no sense. It's just, you're asking for it at that point to have those two teams play against each other. That's just stupid.
Yes.
From an entertainment standpoint, yeah, that'd be great. But it'd be stupid to have these two teams go up against each other because you could have, someone towards the bottom of the depth chart do something really stupid, injure someone. It's just not worth it.
Yep.
In one of these other games, though, logistically, it makes sense when you have 2 in-state teams play because you're able to keep that money in-state. And the reason why I feel like, here's the real reason why I feel like it could be happening sooner rather than later. When the NCAA goes to a 12-team playoff, when the SEC moves over to what is likely to be a 9-game conference schedule, you're going to see fewer and fewer conference games, non-conference games. Do we get to a point, especially with some of these conferences expanding to be quote unquote super conferences, mega conferences? Do we get to a point where some of these non-conference games aren't really happening? Because what I feel like will happen down the road is you will see better, tougher non-conference games. Now, I understand that Gamecock fans, and I'm sure there's other SEC fans out there that feel this way, you already play a tough SEC schedule, right? Let's say you have 9 conference games. You have to play Clemson in there as well if you're able to continue to keep that. I mean, the people that say it's a state law, that's not the case. Okay, we've gone through this before. It's not a freaking state law. And whoever told you that at the bar, they lied to you. Okay, it's not the case. I remember digging this up a couple of years ago because I remember someone saying that, and they were, I don't know, they were friggin' on their wacky tobacco, whoever told them that the water cooler at work that day. That's not the case. It's not a state law. It would be great. I know they've talked about trying to make it a state law, but it's not the case. I say that because that's not even a given that will stay in place in the future. If the conference says, hey, you're only playing your conference teams, that could be a possibility. So I say this because with less and less non-conference games, teams might say, hey, screw it. Why not make a tougher schedule? Because if we do that, even if we lose a game or two, the opportunity to make the college football playoff, it's still there. And if we win those games, it makes our strength of schedule look even better. Because, shoot, I'm not going to be shocked in a couple of years when you see 4 teams from the SEC make the college football playoff in the same season.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to see that. You're going to see teams that don't make it to the SEC championship.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I bring all that up because if there's a possibility to play an in-state team and you're keeping that money in-state, I think teams are going to take advantage of it. Again, the biggest challenge to me, and I'm sure if you talk to Shane Beamer, he might give you some other hurdles that they'd have to go through, are the logistics that occur when you're dealing with a football team. It's not the same in comparison to a basketball team or a baseball team or a soccer team, whatever the case may be. You have 100+ guys. You'd be able to get a lot of work done. Now, the fans, I think in their eyes, they're going to be thinking, oh, going up against SC State, going up against another school, they're going to want to see a traditional game. I can't see that happening. I feel like it would be a controlled scrimmage. It wouldn't be the way I envision it. It wouldn't be like watching a preseason football game in the NFL. It would be more so like a jamboree for high school football where, you have X amount of downs. You might go back to the same spot. You might at some point just go down in the red zone and you're able to get red zone work. It's a controlled scrimmage.
Yeah.
I think being able to do that, it would be beneficial for a lot of people. But again, if you're able to keep the money in state as well, I think it's a no-brainer. That's why I think it will happen at some point in turn, Joe. And, sorry to ramble about that, but
no, you're good.
The college football playoff, that happening, I think it's going to have a domino effect, and that could make it, it could impact and make that happen because of it if there's fewer and fewer non-conference games, especially if we see some of these rivalry games, we want to call it. I mean, I know SC State and South Carolina aren't a rivalry, but these in-state games that we look forward to every year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point, too, with and it would happen sooner than later. I guess I didn't think about how quickly things move in college football. If they want something done, they'll do it. And that's been in the rumblings for a while now. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting thing, which is why, the rant is definitely warranted for sure. Going to, Carolina, Joey, would you see this team is more talented, less talented, or about the same than the past few years? My take on this, I think it's too early to call. I mean, I think if you look at the roster, it's stacking up to be a little bit more talented, but there's still also gaps in positions. We talk about the offensive line. We talk about the defense. I mean, I think just those gaps kind of leads you to believe that, anything could happen with this team. It's kind of similar to last year where, it's similar areas of gaps means, similar level of talent, but I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm a little bit more excited with the Dowell effect, and everything changing on the offense and whatnot, and Spencer and Juice and coming off of those 2 wins at the end of the year. So I don't know. I think personally for me, it's too early to call. Mike, I don't know what you got.
Depth's the biggest thing that I'm paying attention to with this. When you talk about the starters, when you talk about this year's group and you go down the list, right? You want to go quarterback to quarterback, right? Quarterback, Spencer Rattler, April of 2023 versus Spencer Rattler of, April of 2022. Who do you give the check mark to, right? If you go down and you're giving checks to, who's better and this and that, and that starting role, yeah, you'll probably see a lot of check marks in the 2023 column. There'll be some guys in the left, though. There'll be guys that are or were who you have to find guys to replace, right? I mean, you look at a Cam Smith, and this isn't, to crap on a guy like O'Donnell or Marcellus Dial, but I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I mean, you have a Cam Smith or Marcellus Dial or Darius Rush compared to an O'Donnell Fortune. It's way too early. Maybe a disrespect to the other 2 guys that are going into the draft this year to say, oh yeah, those guys are better. No, I mean, come on. And Nick Eamon compared to where he was a year ago, of course. So again, I think this team from a starting lineup standpoint, and there's going to be some question marks. Offensive line in particular. We talk about edge. We talk about even running back. But I think the biggest concern when I say, is this team more talented right now than they were a year ago, is the depth. And that's a question that we're just not going to be able to find out even after this weekend. So that's what I would say to that, Carolina Joey. I know it doesn't necessarily give you the answer that you're probably looking for, but I just think it's way too soon to figure that out. We'll have a better idea after this weekend. Wayne wants to know who wins in an arm wrestling contest.
I got it all day. I got you, Mike, all day. His money's on me. I think it's
you're
good.
You're the type of guy. You're the type of guy that I could see like in a bar fight. You'd like bite someone. Like intern Joe seems like the biter. Joe seems like the biter. He'd be the biter guy.
Mike, I get the call to finish fights. I don't know what you're talking. Allegedly. No, I'm kidding. Why would I seem like the biter? Is it the curly hair?
Intern Joe would be like that guy in the movie scene,
Mike,
like
that's
he's on the ground, he just bites someone. He just bites someone's leg.
No, it's disgusting. I value my teeth. I value my mouth.
Intern Joe would just be.
You're disgusting.
All right.
I can see you doing that because it's a size disadvantage. Maybe I don't know. Okay, that was a little.
All I know that I was a scrapper. That's all I know, man.
I can tell you're from.
You gotta have some cojones to play corner. When you're as tall as me.
True, that's true. I will give you
that. Aaron says, glad to see Intern Joe survive the falling trees in Augusta. All right, so Intern Joe, explain to people what your role was last week, because I didn't really get into it too much, but you were working your second Masters this past weekend. Explain to the people what you were doing out there and who you were working for.
Absolutely. So I had the very high privilege of working my second Masters tournament as a part of my minor. The journalism school at USC makes you pick up a minor. I picked up a minor in sport and entertainment management. And as a part of that, USC has a very big connection with Augusta National Golf Club and the Masters and whatnot. And so I take a class. It's called Golf Tourism Management. It's part of the hospitality side of things with sport and entertainment management. Unbelievable class, unbelievable professor, an unreal opportunity to work the Masters. I was working in the South Village shops selling Peter Millar stuff. I was working with some of the reps. I was doing ops, so I had the earpiece in. I was coordinating. Just, do we need stuff? Do we need polos up? Do we need stuff down? It was kind of cool to see one of the most productive merchandising companies, if you will, or the merchandising brands in the world operate at full tilt. I'm going to be honest, it was really, really cool and something different, right? Like I was able to kind of, shut my phone off. I was kind of inactive on Twitter and stuff from Gamecock stuff for the last week. And that was also too, because I went to Baltimore to watch my little brother play Johns Hopkins last weekend, which was unbelievable. Good to see him and whatnot. Shout out him. Go RU. My little plug there for Rutgers lacrosse. But no, I mean, the Masters was wonderful. I got to, really learn from the guys at Peter Millar too. Just, everything that they go through and just all the ins and outs of, again, like I said, one of the merch or the ins and outs of one of the most productive merchandising companies and brands in the world. And then with that, I mean, we sold out of Peter Millar on Wednesday, Mike. I mean, and our shop, at least the main shop still had some throughout the tournament, but it was slim pickings come Saturday. And when that happened, we were lucky enough to, because we overstaffed, obviously Peter Millar being the hot commodity and stuff like that and whatnot. So we had a lot of people working, and once we sold out of Peter Millar, we didn't necessarily need as many people up on the desk and whatnot. So we were able to take rotating breaks, 15 minutes of pop and whatnot. So I was able to watch some of the golf. And I know some people saw me on the broadcast on Thursday, right behind Justin Rose.
I didn't see this.
I posted on Twitter, DJ. I had shout out David Fox in the athletic office at the presser today. He's like, "Hey, I saw you on TV." I'm like, "Really?"
Well, let me tell you, intern Joe. I'm glad you had a freaking not just
it was awesome.
a tremendous Masters weekend. I'm glad you had a good Thursday because I want to tell you my Thursday for the Masters, it sucked. Okay, it absolutely sucked, and I'll tell you why. It wasn't even freaking 2:00, and the Masters pool that I joined. That I did this year that I was looking forward to. 2 guys withdrew before freaking 2:00. All right. That was how my Thursday went. So while you're out there hanging around Justin Rose and you're on TV. Yeah. I had 2 guys withdraw. I had a third guy that didn't make the cut. Yeah. So
real world problems for us, Mike. For real. Yeah. Like honestly, like it was funny. I was talking to my dad. He's like, "Man, your life sucks eating a pimento cheese and drinking an Arnold Palmer Thursday at the Masters." So it was fun, great tournament. It was also shout out Sam Bennett. He's a Johnny O guy. I'm related to Johnny O. So even though I was working for Peter Millar, I still had a little.
What's Aaron? Aaron, how am I saying it? Ron.
It's Aaron. See, like the Midwestern accent.
I know it's not Ron.
Is the most baseline. I get a lot of Canadian with my accent though because I worked for Notre Dame hockey back when I was home.
But I mean, my Boston accent. I'll tell you right now. I have this like messed up accent because I go around. I mean, you guys will hear the Boston accent probably more than anyone else because you guys are from the South. But I went back up north, and when I was working at the CBS station in Boston, they were like, "We can hear a Southern accent in you." I'm like, "Really? Really?" I mean, it's not like I'm saying like y'all or anything, but like they picked up on that South question. I do want to real quick, Big Red, and then we'll wrap things up here.
Yeah.
Do we have depth enough to the point where our offense and defensive starters don't need to play special teams as well as increasing the likelihood of injuries? I feel like you will always see starters as long as Shane Beamer is here.
Pete Lembo.
Play special teams and Pete Lembo. Now, with that being said, if there are guys that are banged up that play offense, defense, they're starters, right? Maybe they're cautious with guys, but not just here. I've seen some of the best teams I've been around. My senior year in college, that's when things started to really change because the head coach, who's now the head coach of Holy Cross, and he's been there for 5 years. They've won 4 straight Patriot League titles. He's very similar in the manner of which he goes about special teams. Very similar to Beamer, which is if he feels like you can make an impact, he doesn't care if you're a starter or if you're the last man on the depth chart. So I say that because, yes, you want to be smart. You don't want to put guys out there that, I think back, another Patriot comparison, Rob Gronkowski. He was on the field goal team, right? PAT team. And I remember he got hurt his elbow or shoulder. I can't remember exactly what it was, forearm, and it happened on PAT. So little things like that, you try to be smart, but at the same time too, look, special teams, and we've said it for so many years, not just on Gamecock Central, going back to my days at Watch Fox, and you guys know it. It's 1/3 of the game. Since Beamer and Lembo arrived, though, they've shown how important it is. And I'm not going to sit here and go through the chart of if you start on the minus 20, which is your own 20, your side of the ball on the 20. The difference between going down and score the percentage. When you start in the minus 20 in comparison to starting on the minus 40, the difference of scoring that drive, right? So I say that because if they feel like it can make a difference in the game by putting a starter out there and blocking, look, to carry on Joyner, he's playing everywhere. And even if he sees a good chunk of time at running back this season, I bet you he will still see a lot of time on special teams. I promise you he will see a lot of time on special teams because they trust him. They trust him. Harbor, I mean, shoot, I know a lot of people want to talk about putting him back on return. I mean, man, if they feel like they can teach him the technique of coming off the edge and blocking a kick, I mean, think about it. Think about that. And I haven't had this conversation with Lumbo or Beam or anything, but I'm just thinking as someone that enjoyed blocking kicks, and I mean, shoot, we've talked about in the program. I have the Beamer, the Frank Beamer special teams book that you
I was
said.
about to say, Mike.
You get down. It's similar. Those the starting blocks, right? You get out of that block. It's very similar. And because of his speed, you imagine Harbor coming off the edge blocking a kick. Are you kidding me? I'd rather, again,
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up.
I know people would like to see Harbor back returning kicks, but Harbor coming off the edge, in my mind, is a nightmare for special teams because now you're thinking, man, this kid's quick. He's quick. You might have to send two guys there. It could free up someone else. And you might be so worried about getting that kick off. Guess what? You kick it. There's not as much hang time. You have a guy back there, whether it be, Juju or Juice or whoever the hell it is. They're back there. Marion Brown, they might have an opportunity to take off for the house because now that hang time's not there as much. So I would love to see Harbor coming off the edge.
Yeah, I got two takes on Big Red's thing before we close. Just, I mean, I agree. I think I would love to see Nick Harbor coming off the edge. And two, you got to play the starters because it helps, kind of, number one, obviously, like you know the Shane Beamer identity, the Pete Lembo DNA. Like it's special teams is just as important as everything else. So you want to dominate special teams. I'm not saying that the depth guys won't be able to dominate it, but if you have like players in this program want to play special teams now, it's something that they take pride on, and it's something that if you go block a kick, and it's a competition in and of themselves that to do well on special teams. So I think that's huge. It's within the identity and the DNA of the program. So I think, obviously avoiding the likelihood of injuries and stuff like that is fine. But I mean, I think there's a way to do it where you put the guys in spots where they're not, in knock on wood here, but not in spots where they can injure themselves. There's definitely a way to do that. But I would love to see Nick Hart. I think it would be electric, to be quite honest with you.
So a couple things real quick before we wrap up. If you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central, head on over, sign up today, just $29.99 through August 31st. Get caught up on not just Gamecock football. Colin Taylor has been doing an outstanding job following the transfer portal for basketball. As Lamont Paris tries to let's just call it for what it is. Tries to do a facelift on a program that desperately needs it. And there's a lot of eyes on him and this coaching staff as they try to attack the portal. So you have that. There's some stuff with women's basketball. It was a busy night, a historic night. South Carolina women's basketball had 5 players drafted last night in the WNBA draft. That's just the 4th time that a program has been able to do that in the same season. So a lot of good stuff from Chris Wellbaum. We also have some stuff from a Garnet Trust event last night, the WNBA Draft Watch Party at Market on Main. We had a great interview with Olivia Thompson. She shared what she'll be up to in the next couple weeks and months as she transitions away from playing basketball at South Carolina, and as well as recruiting. Recruiting season is picking up. Gamecock baseball, of course. We understand how good they're playing. So you get all of that. You don't just get football. You don't just get one sport. You get everything as well. If you missed any of our program today, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can watch this show in its entirety from the beginning. And if you're not already a subscriber to Gamecock Central's YouTube page, you can sign up, hit that little subscribe button, hit the alert button too, so you can get notified anytime, not just a GC Live programming show comes out, but any new video comes out, and that's all free. That is all free. Or if you're a podcast listener, head on over to Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can be able to sign up for the Gamecock Central podcast shows and get everything, as well as this show and many more, as well as all the 107.5 interviews that happen daily and Garnet Trust takeout over hour as well. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuba. Be sure to follow Gamecock Central all week long, as well as on Saturday for the big, I can't even speak, Intern Joe, the big scrimmage. It is the spring football game. We will have all your coverage from the beginning of the day to the end, and we will have plenty of content leading up until kickoff. Have yourself a great Tuesday, and we will see you again next week.